Hey, and welcome back to the Chromeworks studio in beautiful Ottawa, Canada. I'm Andrew Tomec, your technology teacher, back with another really great Scratch lesson for you. We are doing part 5 of our RPG series today. We've been building this very elaborate RPG game bit by bit, adding a new component every week, and I think it's been going fantastically. I've been working with my son Jeffrey, who's been doing most of the coding for this, and he's created a modular gaming system that's really adaptable to your own projects. You can use our animation system to add animation to your own character, to get them to switch between costumes properly, to make them do cool stuff. You can use our expandable room system and keys to create a map where you can move from one background to another and control the action inside that. And you can create brand new monsters using our existing coding system. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So in part 2, we went and created a skeleton monster and coded it up to work properly within the game. Now today I'm going to show you how to adapt that and create a brand new bad guy. In this case, we're going to do one with projectiles in it. So we're going to create a flying bat character that throws projectiles at you. So that'll be one more element that you can add to your own RPG games as you're building them. The idea being that you can take the code here and just make some minor tweaks to it, change the costumes, change a few of the settings, and then off you go. So I'm going to show you how we're going to take the skeleton code and adapt it to make a brand new bad guy. And so if you follow these steps in your own game project, you can create new bad guys just using the same kind of procedure. So let's go have a look at what we're working on. So this is my part 5 catch-up file. When I say catch-up file, I mean this has all the coding that we did in part 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I've also added any new elements that we need to go. So if you're starting right now, you should probably get working on this catch-up file. And that'll get you caught up with where we've been up until now. If you've been building this before that, you can go ahead and use your existing file, but you're going to have to import the bat graphics. So grab my catch-up file, and what you should probably do is take the graphics. So I've got my bat here. Let's have a look at it. So here's all the different costumes for the bat. You can see we have him flapping around, and we've got him curling to a little ball. And then we've got him dropping dead and dying, and we've got one where he's reacting after he's getting injured. Just like all the other costumes and animations inside this game here, we're using the name of the animation to control it inside of our script, and that's a very important thing. So if you want to do this coding, you're going to need pretty much the exact same graphics that we have, or at least to rename the graphics for your own character. So what I would suggest if you want to keep working on your existing file is to simply open up the catch-up file and save this bat graphic. Just go in and right-click it and then export it. And let me show you what that looks like. So now we've got a little save file. I'm just going to save this as bat test sprite, and then we'll save it. And then load up your own Scratch project. You can load it back up again by loading a new sprite. Go upload sprite right over here in the sprites menu. Point it to bat test sprite. It will import your graphic with all the proper names and costumes. Any code that was in there will also be downloaded as well. So this is one other way that you can grab code from other characters and bring them into your project. So let's say I wanted to take my animation system and use it. I could save all this stuff into the backpack, but there's a bunch of components to it. So maybe it's easier for you to actually grab the entire sprite with all of its code and import that into your project. A really neat way to move stuff around from one project to the next. Okay, I'm going to delete that bat too because we don't need it right now. We're going to start coding bat 1 in a minute, but we just have a minor change to make in the game controller. So let's go ahead and deal with that right now. I'm going to click on the game controller, and this is the background script that just handles setting up rooms and what kind of monsters are going to be in what rooms. It sets up your background music for you, and sets up a few other things. Sets up the dimensions of your rooms as well, so that you're not necessarily able to move through the entire room, and so you're cut off when you're getting to the edges of the screen. Not to the edges of the screen, but to the edges of the playable area. So in this case, you guys have all seen this already. You can only move up to the area that we've defined here. So if I try to move up higher than that, it just won't let me walk into the sky, which is really handy if you're using different kinds of graphics that background graphics that don't necessarily let you, where there's sky, for example. You don't want to go walking up into the sky. Okay, so the only change we have to make to the game controller here is we've got we've got our room set up here with information here for those limits that we've set on the map, left, right, up, and down. And then we have the number of enemies in the room, and that's our skeleton count. We're going to create a brand new element here called bat count to create our second bad guy. And so we're going to create a brand new slot here where you can write in the number of bats that are on any particular level. So we've got this define block here that says that basically starts the process off for filling up those variables with the information. Then we can use those variables later on in the game. So all we have to do here is let's edit it. I'm going to right click on the define block. I'm going to select edit, and I'm going to add a new label, and that label is going to be called bat count. And then I'm going to add a new input, and we're going to call that one bat count as well. Let's click OK. So now that we've made that edit, you can see here that the bat count is now set up inside these reset map blocks. We've got a blank here. So let's go ahead and take our first room, the Savannah, which is 0, 0 on our map grid, and I'll tell it to put 2 bats on that particular level. Maybe I'll just put 1 in some of the other ones, and we can play around with this depending on how you want to set up your game. I'm just going to set up a default 1 in each of these existing rooms right now. All right, so far so good. All right, so we have to add one more element here. We're setting a variable here. So let's go to our variables. Let's go set variable, and we're going to create a brand new variable that's called bat count, and that's what's going to be kept track of inside this block. So we're going to set our bat count to, and that's where we'll fill it with that little red block here that says bat count. And so this is a temporary variable that we're using just inside in the context of this particular thing. But in order to use it elsewhere, we have to copy it to a regular variable that's going to be over here. I made a little mistake though. My bat count is supposed to be a local variable because it's supposed to be, or does it? No, actually, it's keeping a global count on the number of bats for the entire game, so it's okay that it's a global variable. Just had to think about that for a minute. Okay, so we are done in the game controller. Now we're going to go over to the skeleton graphic. So here's all the code. I've set it up inside the catch-up file here so that it's stacked up in pretty much the order that we're going to be working on it here. So we're going to be grabbing a whole bunch of these blocks from the skeleton and drag them over to the bat, which is a blank right now in your file. Some of them need some minor modifications, but other ones we can use whole hog the way that they are right now. And I'm just going to walk you through all the different steps here. We're going to copy these blocks over. Remember, if you're copying blocks from one sprite to another, you simply have to drag it over. So I'm going to grab this green flag one. I think there's only one green flag in this project. And I'm going to drag it over. Let's magnify a little bit so you guys can see better. And you can see that when I drag this over to the bat, there's a little wiggle inside the bat graphic. And that's what will tell us that we're pointing at the right place. Really, I'm not looking at where the blocks of code are, but where my cursor is. And so as long as my cursor, my little hand here, is pointing at the bat, then I'm going to end up copying to the right place. As soon as I let go, the code will drop back to where it was before we messed with it. And if we go over to the bat, you can see, as we zoom out here, the code is in fact there as well. Okay, beautiful. Just get this to a proper size. Okay, so, whoops, just trying to get this set up properly here. Not sure why my toolbar is showing where it shouldn't be. Okay, so this is where we're setting our initial variables for the bat. We need to change the bat health to 1. It takes only 1 hit to destroy these bats. They're much more fragile. We're using this variable here called isClone to keep track of whether it's a clone or not, and that'll be important when we're duplicating our character, because we don't want our clones making more clones, of course. So that's why we have this variable called isClone that will keep track of whether our individual characters are clones or not. And then we're going to reset our enemy count. Yeah, everything else is fine here. We're going to hide. And we can also, let's just switch our background, our image here. Sorry if there's any background noise, guys. There's a crew from the city outside mulching trees and cutting down foliage. So that will explain any of those sounds you're hearing. Anyway, so let's go switch our costume. I'm not sure whether we're going to need this or not, but we're going to change it to the default costume, which is Bat Run. And we're just going to do that to make sure that every time we restart the game, our bats are running through the proper animation. Okay, so let's move around to the next block of code now, which is the map changed event. So inside the skeleton, this is the code that generates new skeletons every time that we enter a new map again. So what it does is pick the number of enemies that we've set up in our game controller for that level, places them on the map in an area that's within the limits of the map, and then places them more or less randomly. There's a bit of code here that I explained last time that we're using to distribute them around the map so that they're not touching the player or too close to the player when you get started. Okay, so we're going to take this whole block of code and copy it over to the bat next. We're going to do this with with a whole bunch of blocks here. So we're just going to do it one at a time though. Okay, so we're back in the bat again. Here's our map change. Let's make sure that our blocks aren't overlapping. When we drag stuff over, they often end up in kind of random locations on the screen where they're overlapping each other. So be careful to keep everything tidy here. So the only change we want to make here is we're repeating this loop. Basically, here it is. We're repeating this loop the number of times that matches the skeleton count. Sorry, I had something messed up there. Okay, so we're repeating the loop here, the number of times that we have skeletons inside the room here, but we're doing bats now, so we're going to change that to our bat count. So in the case of the first level, we have 2 bats set up. This is what I did. I dragged it into the wait block instead of the repeat block. So we're waiting 0 seconds here, which is just going to make sure that, that this happens after we've initialized our room. And then we're going to repeat creating the bats twice on the first level and however many times you set it up for the other levels. Okay, so that part's good. Let's go back to the skeleton again. We're going to go down to the next block of code here. And these next 2 blocks here are our animation system. And we've set this up here to go through the different costumes based on how they're named, so that depending on what the action is, you can see here in our define animation. I explained this way back in part 2, but basically we've got a animation here with the name that we're looking for, the wait time, which is the delay in between frames of animation, and whether the animation loops or not. So this is generic code. These 2 blocks, these next couple of blocks handle that, and they really don't need to be changed at all here. So let's start with this when I started the clone block. This just makes sure that whoever is furthest down on the map is at the front. So let's just drag that over to the bat. We'll go and rearrange it. Again, it's on top in the wrong place. So we'll plunk it down here. Back to our skeleton. Now we're getting into our animation system. I think I jumped the gun on that. So these two blocks here are the magical blocks that you can use to keep your animation for all your characters in line. As long as you've named everything properly, you'll be able to have it shift through the animations just using one of these set animation blocks that we're creating here. And you'll see a little later how we set that, how we deploy this here. Okay, so these two blocks are completely identical, and in fact, any new character you create, you simply have to take these two big chunks of code and copy it over and then deploy it properly in order to get your character animating. So let's go and drag these two blocks over to the bat. Let's do this one. I'll do this one too. All right, let's go back and rearrange things a little bit again, just to keep it tidy. Make sure you grab these blocks from the top, as always, because if you take them apart, you'll never be able to put them back together again. Okay, so we don't have to make any changes at all to this code, and in fact, not make any changes to this code no matter what kind of game you're making. If you want to use this animation system, just save these two blocks into your inventory, and you'll be able to use them at any time to control the animation of your characters. Okay, there's one more block here that we can just grab a whole hog from our skeleton. Now let's go grab that right now. Oh, actually, it's not completely the same. So we're in our skeleton now. We're going to use the block here that says check if injured. This is checking to see if our bad guy needs to play his injured animation if he's been hurt. And so we're going to have him kind of recoil backwards. He only has 1 hit point, so being hurt means that he's going to die as well. But we'll always want him to go through the injured animation before he goes into his death animation, just to show that he's been hit by something. So let's grab this check if injured block, and we're going to drag it over to the bat. We have to make some changes, though, as I said, because the hit points on these bats are different. So we're going to need them to behave a little bit differently. So inside here, we're going to check if health is less than 1 because they only have 1 hit point. And the animation we need here is called bat_injured. It's with a capital B. And that matches up with the costumes in the bat, right? So there's a bunch of costumes here let me show you what they look like, called bat injured. And this is the bat recoiling backwards, and then he turns white because he's been hit. And that's our indicator that he's been hit by a sword. And then he flies backwards and curls up into a little ball. And after that, he'll go into his death animation as well. Okay, so that part's good. Now, we also need to check if he's dead or not. So let's go ahead and grab that. So after we check if he's injured, the next thing we do in our script is check it, see if he's dead. Let's drag this over to the bat. And let's go looking for it again, dragging stuff over. It seems like it's actually putting it always into the same spot. This must be like the 0-0 position on the map. And so I guess if I move this green flag out of the way, it'll appear at the top next time. Let's have a look. Let's try it out next time anyway and see what happens. Okay, so check if dead. Now we need to make a few minor changes here again. Okay, so if he's dead, if his health is less than 1, now that stays the same because regardless of which character it is, when it gets to 0, he'll die, of course. We don't want to go equals 0, of course, as is always the case in these games, because if it equals 0, that means that if he gets hit twice and his health goes down to -1, he won't die. So we always like to go less than 1 when we're looking at hit points. So the animation we're playing here when he gets hit is simply the one called bat_death, again with a capital B. It'll be looking for that text. And I don't think that anything else has to change inside this check if dead. So you can see that a lot of this code is very, very similar, which means that if you're using it in your own video games, you can pretty much duplicate everything we've been doing here and create brand new bad guys that do exactly what you want, that look different, but that behave very similarly to these creatures that we have here. I don't think there's anything to test yet because our bats are still going to be invisible when they start on the screen. We'll be able to have a look at that in just a second, but we're not quite ready to do that yet. All right, So now we're getting into some slightly more in-depth stuff that that is going to require a few more changes. So let's go have a look at that right now. We'll go back to the skeleton, and if you scroll back up to the top of your file here on your skeleton, you'll see that I lined up some stuff. So I made one big tall set of blocks here inside the catch-up file that that has all the stuff that we need to make minimal changes to. Now the stuff over here on the right is much more substantially changed. If you're not working off of the catch-up file, it's okay. You should just look at the skeleton file and find the files that that contain this information and just drag those over. You should totally be able to do this without actually using my file. Okay, so this is the master code block that actually runs the game. It runs all of these different little subroutines, the check if injured, check if dead. It sets the animation to the default and starts to check and see if the player's still alive, because your characters are going to behave, your bad guys are going to behave differently if they've already killed your guy. And so this changes them to an idle animation if you're dead, and does a few other minor things. I went over this all in detail in part 2, so you can go have a look at that if you want to know how this all runs. But we're taking advantage of all of these custom blocks that we've created here. Okay, so this is, there's a lot of elements that will remain the same here, but a few of them that need to be changed. There's like 5 or 6 things that we're going to have to change here. So let's just drag this whole thing over to the bat, and I believe it will show up at the top of the file here. Let's go have a look. Yes, so it seems like when you drag files over, they always go to a point that Scratch has designated as your central point, and they'll always end up on that same spot, and that's why they're all on top of each other. So if you're aware of that, you can maybe move your main file, your code over to make allowances for that so that stuff doesn't end up on top of each other. So let's go ahead and start modifying this file. We just need to make some changes to turn it into a bat, and there's a few little things that we're going to need to do here. So for starters, we have a new custom block that we're going to be creating in a little bit, and that's called check if projectile. Now we're going to be doing something that we've done in previous games, which is we're going to be, instead of creating a separate projectile for our bat, we're actually going to have our bats turn into projectiles. Now this, because of the way that Scratch works with clones, this is actually a really beneficial thing to do, because when you're setting up clones, if you're giving orders to a character to shoot, it's hard to actually specify which clone it is the one that's going to be shooting. And so the way to solve that is by having the clone itself become the bullet. The clone makes a copy of itself, and then that copy turns into a bullet. And then the clone knows where it is, right? If we want one of 3 bats to get orders to shoot, which of those ones is the one that's going to get the order? So that's always a little bit complicated. And so this is the workaround that we've come up with. It's actually quite elegant. So that's why we're making copies of ourselves. And so that's why we're checking to see if we're a projectile. So let's go ahead and make a custom block here. There's no special inputs or anything here, so we're just going to call it check if projectile. And inside that block, which will be spelled that wrong. Inside that block is where we're going to be checking to see if it's a bullet and telling it what to do if it is a projectile. Okay, let's add that in. It's the first thing that should happen before we check if it's injured or dead. We want to see that it's a projectile, because of course it's going to behave a lot differently if it's a projectile. Okay, now here under set animation, skeleton run is the default costume for the skeleton, and we've got the same thing for our bat as well. So we've got an element here called bat run _run. Of course the bat isn't actually running, it's flying, but we're just going to use the same naming convention here to keep everything straightforward. The timings and everything else don't have to change at all. The 0.07 animation rate will work well, and it is a looping animation, so that's fine. All right. Now, this is where our bats move forward towards us. They're pointing towards the player. if we're alive, of course, and they're moving 2 steps for the skeletons, but the bats are going to move a little slower. We're going to make them move at a speed of 1 step. And we're going to change a few more of these references as well here. So this skeleton run goes back to being bat run. Make sure you use capital letters, or at least use the same name as the costumes inside your character, right? And now, if distance to player is less than 70, this is the area where it decides whether it's going to attack or not. Once your bad guy closes to a certain distance and he attacks. Now, these are going to be shooting bad guys, so of course they want to stand off a little bit and be a bit farther away from our player before they start shooting. So they're not going to try and close as close. We're going to make that number 200, which means that when they're within 200 pixels, or about halfway across the screen, that's when they're going to stop and start shooting at us. If the distance is less, then we need to get them into their attack animation. Now the skeletons go into an idle animation here before they attack. And but the bat doesn't have an idle animation. The idle animation is still flying. So we're just going to change this back to bat_run. Bat_run. There we go. Now, the wait time before they actually shoot should be a little bit longer here. So we're going to make it 1 second. So they're going to stop. So they're going to get within range, stop, wait 1 second, and then attack. If you find that they're not shooting fast enough, you can change that delay around. That's simply how long they pause before they attack. And then the bat's going to attack there. Now we're going to... this is a custom block, and we can actually, instead of reinventing the wheel here and making a new bat attack here, we can just rename this attack. Let's right-click it, edit it. This will not change the skeleton attack inside the skeleton, so that's not something you need to worry about. It's not letting me edit. I'm working on the desktop version of Scratch here, and it seems like they've neglected a little bit of code here because I'm not actually able to edit this block the way that I should be able to. So let's go ahead and we'll make a new block here called, sorry, what was it called? It was called bat attack. Make a new block. We don't have to set up any other parameters here, so let's just go bat attack, and I'll just sub that in. So we should have been able to edit it, and I bet if you're trying at home, you'll probably be able to do it if you're working on the online version. It's just that I'm working on the desktop version. I've been having some connectivity problems with the Scratch server today, so I thought I would try doing this in the desktop version where it's a little smoother. All right, so bat attack. So it waits 1 second and then attacks. We'll figure out how that attack works in just a second. Now, this is the spot where it changes its size based on how high or low you are up on the screen, and that will make them appear to get bigger as they get into the foreground. That doesn't have to change. Here's our idle animation, which I don't think there is a bat idle animation. I thought I just said there wasn't one, so I think that's an error. We just needed to say bat run. Yeah, there's no bat idle animation, so that is an error. Let's just change that to bat_run. Okay. All right, and that is all the changes we need to make. So our skeleton is actually, sorry, our bats are actually showing now with this show command inside this. So let's see if they actually turn up here. We'll maximize our game, and we should have 2 guys set up inside this room here when we start. So there we go. Oh, they're looking quite lovely. So they fly towards us. You can see that they're in their beautiful animation. There's only one of them. Oh, there's the other guy. So he started on the left, but the code is set up so that he can't get any closer. So he stayed off screen until I moved to the right, and that's when he actually started moving towards me. So you can see that they'll continue moving towards you until they get within 200 pixels of you, and then they'll stop. And then if they have a bullet, they'll shoot it. So we're looking good. You can see how easy it is to set up animations here. You really just need to download a sprite of some kind that has an animation, and then copy over these blocks out of your library or out of your backpack, and you can get something really nice going without doing a lot of coding. So please steal my code here and use it in all your own projects as well. All right, I'm just looking at the variables here. I'm seeing that we have a bat count here that's not being updated properly. I'm just going to hide that variable. We're going to look at that later anyway. All right, so now we just need to customize those couple of blocks that tell it what to do if it's attacking, and then tell it what to do if it's a projectile. So let's go ahead and define bat attack here. So I think that we're just going to do this one from the beginning. I don't think we have any code that we need from the skeleton here. So let's just build this from the ground up. I'll go bat attack. So the first thing we want to do is tell it what animation to use. So let's go back to my blocks and we'll set animation. So the animation is going to go into is bat underscore attack. And then the delay is a little bit slower, 0.06. And the looping is no, it says 0, because of course we don't want it to attack over and over again. Let's see how that changes its behavior. I think that we'll see something a little different here when it comes time for them to shoot you. So we'll wait for our bats to approach us, and when they get within distance, they wait 1 second, and then they switch into this attacking animation. It's very, very quick, and because they're not shooting bullets, they just jump right back to the old animation again. But you can see they're doing something here, which is good news. All right, we'll have to continue with this. So let's have them wait a little bit. So that's why we can't see what's happening here, because they're not waiting before they change back to the original animation. Let's go 0.2. And let's see whether that makes a difference or not. We should be able to see the attack animation a little more clearly now when they get closer. There we go, and you can see they curl up into a little ball. It's very, very quick, right? But it'll look more obvious as we keep coding this. Okay, so we're going to play a little sound effect here. Let's use a start sound command. I'm just using the start sound, the /1 here, which sounds like this. And that's the same one we used on the skeletons. And if you want to have a different sound for a shooting effect, you can certainly grab anything that you want to. I'm just keeping it simple here. All right, so let's wait until it runs through the entire shoot animation before we move on to something else. So we were only looking at the first frame of the shooting animation. That's part of what was going on here. Let's go to our control blocks. We'll grab a wait until block here. We'll wait until the variable called animation ended is equal to 1. So let's go animation ended is equal to 1. All right, that will keep him doing stuff until the animation is over. All right, and here's where he's going to change into a bullet. Let's just have another look at the code here and see whether we can see the animation a little better here. So the bats approach you, and then I think they'll play through their entire shoot animation. There you go, they turn into a little ball, and they spit out the projectiles, and then they start flapping again. Beautiful, that's looking a lot better now. Nice. Okay, so now here's the part where they turn into a projectile. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of what costume they're wearing, so that once they're done turning into a projectile, they'll turn right back to their original costume again. So we have a variable here that we've created called temp, and that is just storing the costume number that our guy is currently wearing. So let's go set temp. Now this is a local variable, meaning that each one of these guys will have its own temp that's set up, and it'll just remember what costume he was wearing before he shot. So set temp to costume number. Let's go back to costume number. So that'll just store that number inside that temp variable. Now we're going to switch our costume to a projectile. So switch costume to bat flying projectile, which is our bullet costume, or one of them. Our bullet is going to be animated here, which is kind of cool. Now we're going to set our health to 0. This is the health for the costume, right? It doesn't. So the health 0 doesn't mean it has no hit points. It just means that, so set health. It just means it's going to be treated differently from the skeletons and the bats because it's a bullet. And so we're just going to set it to 0 so that it knows that it's a bullet. All right, now we're creating a clone of ourselves. Let's go to our control blocks, create a clone of myself. And then we're going to switch our costume back again. So let's go to our looks command. We'll go switch costume to, and we'll make it the number of that temp variable. So just drag the temp variable in there. That'll bring our bats back to their original costume. And we're going to set their health back to 1 again. Set health back to 1. And that will keep track of, so that'll bring our guys back up to the original health because we had to take it away to make the bullet's health 0. Okay, that's all we have to do for the bat attack. So now they're going to be creating the bullets. What happens if they are bullets? We'll just blast through this. We're actually getting very close to the end here, guys. This is going to be a fairly short chapter compared to the other ones. So let's go define the the check if projectile. Now, there should be a define block here somewhere. Let's see where it got tucked. Here it is, check if projectile. All right, so what's it going to do if it's a bullet? Okay, so this block is all contained within a with an if statement. We're just checking to see if it's wearing a flying projectile costume. So let's go ahead and go if costume name contains flying projectile. So we're going to go to our operators where we have our text commands here that will let us look at text. We'll find the block that says apple contains A. We'll pop that in there. But we actually want to look at the costume name, of course. Let's go to our looks, and we'll grab the block here that says costume number, and we'll change it to costume name. If the costume name contains underscore flying projectile, let's make sure we're spelling it properly. Oh, I don't have an actual underscore there. Underscore flying, and then capital P, projectile. Make sure you spell this the same way it's spelled inside your costume, or this will mess up completely. All right, and inside here, if it contains a flying projectile, if we've changed it to flying projectile, then we need to start cycling through that animation. So let's go back to our My Blocks. We'll grab a set animation block here, and we'll call it bat underscore flying projectile. I'll just copy this code from here to save a little bit of time. So I'll go bat underscore flying projectile. The animation moves quickly, 0.1, and it does in fact loop here. So it's going to go ahead and create that. And once it does, it's going to go into a loop here. So let's go grab us a forever. We'll pop it inside the thing. So it's basically checking if it's a projectile, and then if it is, it'll start looping through the projectile animation. So forever, and in here, okay, so let's add another if statement. This will make sense in a second here. We're going to use the same code here again. So it's going to keep running as long as the costume says flying projectile. So let's go ahead and grab this entire contain statement. We'll duplicate it and pop it in there. So as long as the costume still says flying projectile, now let's move in here as well. So what if it's named properly, it will move. Now, Jeffrey had the speed at like 1.8 or something. You can decide yourself how fast you want these projectiles to move. It shouldn't be too fast because of the delay in your attack speed. I'm going to try a speed of maybe 3 or so here and see what that looks like. And underneath that, we're going to add another if statement. And that if statement, okay, it's a little tricky to get in there because it's, oh yeah, it's supposed to be inside the forever. That's right. There we go. And we're just going to get it to delete itself if it's touching the edge. So we'll go to our sensing blocks here. We'll go grab a touching block and say touching edge. And if it's touching the edge, of course, we'll delete the clone. So if the bullet misses you, we'll have it delete itself. We'll go to our control blocks and say delete this clone. Okay. So we've got this part all dealt with. Now there's one more bit of code that we need to grab, and that is the code that will define whether whether the bullets do damage to us or whether we can do damage to the bullets. And we'll deal with that in just a second. Our bullets should be working properly now, though, so let's go have a look and see whether whether we've coded this properly. Click the green flag. So our two guys approach. When they get close enough, they should switch to projectile mode. There you go, and there's our projectiles moving quite nicely. And they're aiming at us. Well, you see, this didn't take much at all, and they keep moving closer, trying to close on us and shooting the bullets at us. Now, the bullets don't do any damage to us, and we don't do any damage to them, regardless of what we're doing here. I think we can kill our bad guys, though. No, that's not working either. So that's all coming up in a second here. But these guys are shooting quite nicely. There we go. So that wasn't too hard to set up at all. Okay, just a little bit more code to do, and that's just going to deal with damages and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and find that right now inside my reference file here. Okay, so we're going to grab a big block of code from our skeleton file, but it needs to have some changes made to it. So it's this big wide block of code here that's called When I Started the Clone, and this, as before, deals with whether you can take damage or not from the thing that's attacking you. Let's copy all this over to our bat. There we go. Now we're gonna let's find it. It's up at the top again as we expected it. I'll just move it way over to the right here. Okay, so what we're going to do here is get rid of the second if statement. This is the second if statement. Basically checks to see if the if the enemy is touching you. Now, that in the skeleton, that means it's a sword slash, but things have to work a little bit differently because we are inside of a bullet here. We're looking at when the bullet hit you, of course. So that's going to be a little bit different here. We're going to pull that out. Now, I think I'm just going to trash that because if touching, yeah, I'm just looking to see what's in there and whether we can reuse some of this code. I think we might be able to reuse this code in a second here, so let's just keep it on the side here for now. And let's look at this When I Started the Clone code and make any necessary changes. The only thing we have to do here is, oh, actually, so this part remains the same. So this part where if it's wearing a costume that has the word damage in it, so if you're wearing if costume name of player contains damage, okay. So basically this is checking to see if your character is wearing the costume where he's slashing out with his sword, and if he's touching it with the active part of his sword, which is white, and oh, so here's the minor part that has to change here. Costume name has to be bat injured rather than skeleton injured. We'll change that. Okay, then we'll change our health by -1. Okay, good. So let's test this out. We should be able to attack our bats now. Let's go swipe him with the sword. Ah, there we go. He took damage, fell down, and faded away. All that stuff's being done for you. We didn't have to code it because it's already included in the code that we've set up in already. So that's beautiful. Okay, so now we need one more When I Started the Clone, and this is going to check and see if you've been hit by a bullet and what's going to happen in that circumstance. So let's grab, I think we're going to build this one from the beginning. We might steal a little bit of code from down here, but it's going to be mostly original stuff. So let's go When I Started the Clone. We'll need a forever in here. We're checking forever to see if we've been hit by a bullet. And we'll put an if statement in here. If the costume contains the words flying projectile. So let's go grab another contains block. Here it is, apple contains A. And so we'll say if costume name contains flying projectile, I'll type flying projectile. It's camel case, which means that our every time we separate a word, we add a capital letter there to indicate that. And under Apple here, we'll grab a costume name block, which is our costume number block, modified to say name. There we go. All right, so now we're going to check and see if our player is touching it with his sword. You remember that all the sprites or all the costumes where our player is able to attack all have that underscore DMG for damage at the end of the file name. So we're going to check and see if he's wearing a costume that has DMG in it, and if it's touching a bullet, and then we can, and if so, we can run the bullet through the explode animation that will make it explode. Okay, so let's go set animation. So, oh, sorry, no, first we need to do another if statement in here. So let's go if. And so we want it to say if it's touching player and the costume name contains. So let's go grab an and statement here. I think we can salvage some of the blocks that we pulled out of this other one here just to save us a little bit of time. So we're going to say touching player and costume name of player. This is one of these sensing blocks. Yeah, let's grab that. I'm just going to duplicate it because we're going to need it again later. And costume name of player contains. So let's grab a contains block here from our green operators block. So costume name of player, that will tell us what the name of the costume is and whether it has damage at the end of it. So let's go underscore DMG. So if I'm wearing that costume and I'm touching a bullet, then we're going to set the bullet into an explosion animation here. So let's go to my blocks. We'll grab a set animation block. Now it's the costume for the projectile to explode is called bat underscore explode projectile. No spaces here, just capital letters, camel case to tell you the space between the different words here. All right, the animation delay can be 0.06, and the looping, we don't need to explode more than once, so we'll loop of 0. Now we'll have it play through that animation until the animation ended variable flips back to 1. So let's go wait until animation ended is equal to 1. So we'll grab an equal sign from our operators, equals 1, and we'll find that variable called animation ended and drop it in there. So, and once that happens, once the animation's over, we're done with our explosion. So we can go back to our control block here and delete the clone and get rid of it. Okay, we should be able to shoot our bad guys. Sorry, not our bad guys, but our bad guy projectiles now. So let's see if that works. We'll move on to the screen, wait for them to approach us, fire their bullets, and then I will just white bullet. Yes, they're exploding nicely. Oh, I got hit once. So nothing's happening yet because we haven't told it what to do. Beautiful. You got it shooting very quickly. It's going to be very challenging. So this is where you might have to tweak the settings a little bit if the game's too hard. But of course, you can just walk out of the way if you need to as well. Beautiful. And our bad guys are getting killed now too, if you look at that. Beautiful. Okay. So all we have to do now is make them able to hurt us. Right now they're not doing damage to us. Let me just demonstrate that again. We'll just stand there and let them hit us. So they're not doing damage to us. Yeah, so we're going to add that right now. And then I think we'll be wrapped up here. So we need a second if statement inside this first if statement. So it's going to be right below this one. So let's grab an if. Plunk it down right there so it's parallel to this one and inside the other if statement. Okay, and we're going to say if. So if the bullet is touching the player and you haven't been injured yet and you're still alive, then it can injure you. So if you're in the middle of being injured, of course, we don't want to do damage to you twice, and that's why we're doing that check. So we're going to need a couple of and statements here. I don't think we can... Oh yeah, so some of this code we can grab. So we need to say if touching player just pull this whole thing out. So if touching player, we actually need two and statements nested together here. Let's put those together here, and then we'll just start filling it up. So inside the if statement, we'll put an and then an and inside there. So we're going to say if touching player, let's grab a touching block. If the bullet is touching the player and costume name of player, and costume name of player is not injured. So if he hasn't been injured, and we actually have one of these that we can grab from before here, not costume name of player contains player injured. So we just grab this whole not statement, put it inside the second slot here. So if it's touching the player and we're not wearing an injured costume already, and we're alive, so player health is greater than 0. We've got one of those already that we used it the last time. We'll reuse that. I'm all in favor of recycling, boys and girls. All right. So what's going to happen if all those conditions are true? Well, first of all, we need to do damage. So let's change player health by -1 and reset the player. That'll just put the player's animation back into a default setting again. Then we're going to play the explosion animation for the bat exploding, and then we're going to wait until, so we're going to do everything that's inside this if statement and just do it below here as well. So let's duplicate all of this code and plump it underneath. So now we've just got the bullet disposing of itself and going through an explosion animation. Let's get rid of this. I think this should work now. So we should be taking damage when the projectiles hit us. Let's give it a try here. I'll move on to the screen and wait for them to start shooting me. And ow! Oh no! Oh, and I'm dead. There we go. Works beautifully. So now we can actually have a little battle with these guys. Let's see if we can take these guys out. So, of course, there's skeletons that are going to be in the way at the beginning that are going to stop us from taking these guys out. But, whoa! Whoa! Alright, I just got killed there. Let's add some skeletons to the room and see if we can test it out that way. I'm going to go back to my game controller. I'll find the controls for the first room here, which is Savannah 00, and I'll make the skeleton, maybe 3 skeletons come up in this room as well, and that'll make for a little bit of a fairer fight here. Green flag clicked, move on to the screen. Here they are, and where are their skeletons? Oh, they're behind us. I'll take out the skeletons. Oh, and one more skeleton here. There we go, and I swipe those guys. Excellent, and now I can move on to the next room. Beautiful. Let's see if there's any bad guys in this room. Yes. There we go, kill him. And now our skeletons appear. Beautiful, so we've got a little bit of variety in the game now, which is really great. I've picked up a key here. You can have a look at episode 4 to see how that happens. So that pretty much wraps it up. It wasn't too complex. We were mostly reusing existing code, but I just wanted to show you how to take the existing code that we created for our skeleton and modify it to do something new, in this case a projectile. Now we have 2 different kinds of enemies, melee attackers and projectile attackers. You can take the same code and use it on almost any project. You could have robots shooting lasers or other robots wielding sledgehammers or whatever it is that you want. You just need to name your costume properly and just copy paste this code from this project. And you can use this for almost any kind of gaming project that you want. This is what I love about the way this has all been coded. It's nicely modular and it's eminently reusable. So if you guys want to go ahead and steal my code and reuse it for your own projects, you're welcome to do that. So we've been doing this for a long time. This is the 5th or the 4th week in a row that we've been working on this. We're going to do one more lesson in our RPG series next week, and we're going to wrap it up with a big boss battle. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've got Jeffrey coding it right now. I'm not quite sure what it's going to look like yet, but we're very excited to get that going. And after that, you should have all the components you need to make a fun little adventure type RPG game, create your own maps and keys and bad guys and all kinds of stuff. So looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with that. In the meantime, I am going to wrap up for now, and I will see you next week. So, well, for part 5. So thanks a lot, and keep coding, guys. Bye now.